Racist cop arrests black woman. Turns out she's state lawyer. In America, a country where justice is promised for all, there are moments when just a glance, a single assumption, is enough to turn an innocent person into a suspect. And at exactly 3:17 p.m. that day, in the sweltering 97-degree heat of the Parkwood Plaza parking lot, such a moment occurred, a mistake the entire legal system would pay for. Before we dive into this story, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Bella Lawson, 36 years old, state attorney of Southbridge, had just concluded a trial that lasted more than 4 hours. It was a tense session down to the final minute, involving a human trafficking case in which she had presented evidence so compelling, the lead defendant was forced to plead guilty. Despite the victory, time and effort had drained her. Wearing a cream-colored suit, slightly wrinkled under the sun, Bella hurried toward her SUV, a sleek black Chevy Tahoe with a license plate ending in the familiar 3 letters, LAW917. She opened the car door, panting, rifling through the front seat to find her wallet, which held her ID, house keys, office badge, and state judicial clearance card. Sweat dripped down her temple as she pushed aside stacks of case files and crumpled receipts, worried she had lost the wallet somewhere. She couldn't go back to court. She couldn't restart a day already stretched to its limits. But what Bella didn't know was that while she was searching for her wallet, a local patrol car had quietly pulled up from the far end of the parking lot. Softly, slowly, like a predator stalking its prey. Sunlight bounced off the hood in blinding glares, but the figure in uniform was unmistakable. Corbin, a 48-year-old veteran officer, once praised for his decisive conduct, but also the subject of 7 internal complaints involving violence and racial bias. All 7 dismissed due to lack of evidence. Corbin stepped out of the car, heavy-footed, his eyes cold. He glanced at Bella, a black woman, leaning into a luxury SUV with no parking tag on the windshield, and made an instant judgment. "What are you doing here?" His voice was curt, the tone unmasked in suspicion. Bella looked up, blinking against the glare. She maintained her usual composed manner. "I dropped my wallet in the car just trying to find it." Corbin didn't ask for her name. He didn't request ID. He said nothing about her civil rights. He simply crossed his arms, took half a step back, and scanned her from hair to heels like he was sizing up a criminal. "You sure this is your car?" he asked, tilting his chin toward the license plate. Bella nodded and gestured toward the documents on the front seat, but Corbin cut her off. "Step away from the vehicle. Now." Not wanting to escalate things, she stepped back a few paces, both hands raised slightly in a cooperative stance. But in that very moment, the irrational verdict was rendered. No license plate check, no ID scan, no witness inquiry, no internal system lookup. Corbin advanced, clamped Bella's wrist, turned her around, and pulled out his standard-issue handcuffs, securing them to her wrist with the practiced motion of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "You're under arrest for unauthorized vehicle entry," he declared, his voice icy. In the distance, 2 City Hall employees stood watching, one adjusting his tie, the other opening a car door. Neither intervened. A parking lot security guard hesitated to pull out his phone, but tucked it away again. And Bella, though a state attorney's sworn representative of the law, was still escorted away like a nameless criminal under the scorching sun, in a system that had yet to learn how to see people as people, not as profiles. And the cruelest part of it all, this was only the beginning. The metal handcuffs tightened around Bella Lawson's wrists, like a cruel reminder that, in the eyes of some who wear the badge, skin color can outweigh a state-issued judicial ID. Under the scorching 98-degree Fahrenheit sun that was softening even the asphalt, she was dragged away like a foreign object that needed to be removed from what they considered a safe space. Corbin didn't see her as a person, but as a threat that needed to be subdued, as if her very presence in a luxury parking lot was already a provocation. "You resisting?" he growled, even though Bella remained silent, her hands already locked behind her back. Each step she took on the blacktop felt glued down by a thick, suffocating wave of heat. "I'm a state attorney," she repeated, for the third time. "This is my car. My wallet's inside. You can check the plates. State attorney. Someone like you." Corbin cut her off, his voice half smirk, half contempt. In those few words, Bella heard everything she had ever fought against. The invisible rejections, the suspicious stares, the resumes discarded simply because the name Lawson appeared under the box marked African American female. Her phone, lying abandoned under the driver's seat, blinked faintly. 9 missed calls from the state attorney's office. Her colleagues were looking for her. But at that moment, they had no idea that the woman who fought for justice had just become the victim of the very abuse of power she had sworn to oppose. No inquiry, no confirmation, no call to dispatch, no access to the state police database. Not a single standard procedure for a suspected theft was followed. On the drive to Central Precinct, Corbin sat behind the wheel with a stoic face, but the corner of his mouth curled into a vague, self-satisfied smile, like he'd just cracked a major case in broad daylight. Every time Bella tried to speak, he turned the radio volume higher, as if even the right to be heard required permission. At the station, no one greeted her. No one asked, "What's your name?" A young officer walked past, let his eyes rest on her for a second, then turned away. No body cams were turned on, a violation of Southbridge's state mandate issued in January, requiring all civil engagements to be recorded. Bella was taken to a cold holding room, whitewashed concrete walls peeling in patches, cheap plastic chairs, a flickering fluorescent light that seemed exhausted, a rickety table, and a wall clock that had stopped ticking. No intake officer. No booking form. No one asked for her ID. Nothing but indifference. She sat there for nearly an hour, still handcuffed, wrists now marked with deep purple welts. No water. No phone. No explanation. And behind the two-way mirror, Corbin stood talking to another officer, pointing at her like one might gesture at an unclaimed piece of evidence. Bella took a deep breath. The years of law school, the trials where she defended the powerless, the hearings before the state legislature, the cases she'd won because she believed in the clarity of the law. All of it now felt distant, blurred, and unreachable. Because in this moment, inside that frigid, indifferent room, she wasn't State Attorney Bella Lawson. She was just a black woman without a wallet, without papers, and without the benefit of belief. And she began to understand. Justice doesn't always arrive in time, but prejudice always gets there first. 3 hours and 17 minutes. That was how long Bella Lawson had been unlawfully detained without a single officer at the precinct, asking her name or permitting her a phone call. The silence around her was not the absence of sound, but the heavy presence of disregard. Bella sat motionless in the holding room, her wrists still bearing the marks of the cuffs, the flickering fluorescent light breathing unevenly, and the yellowing white walls only deepening the feeling that she was disappearing into a void where the law no longer offered anything to hold on to. When she was finally allowed to make a phone call, Bella did not hesitate. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the receiver, but her voice was steady and clear. "Elias, it's Bella. I'm being held at Central. No ID, no verification, and they just arrested me for looking for my wallet in my car." On the other end of the line was Elias Edwards, one of the most formidable criminal attorneys in Southbridge. He had represented nearly 300 clients over 17 years, including more than 80 cases involving police misconduct. His win rate stood at 82%, a number that made any prosecutor's office tread carefully. But Elias wasn't just known for his litigation skills. He was known for one unwavering principle: no one, uniformed or not, stands above the law. He said nothing more, only replied, "Don't say another word. I'm on my way." 15 minutes later, a silver Lexus pulled up in front of Central Precinct. Elias stepped out, carrying a worn leather briefcase packed with legal strategies, a file hastily printed from his office, and in his hand, a copy of the vehicle registration bearing the name Bella Lawson, State Attorney Office, Southbridge Judicial Division. As soon as he entered the main corridor, Elias didn't request, he demanded. "I want to know who's responsible for detaining citizen Bella Lawson." A female officer attempted to stop him, asking that he wait for intake procedures. Elias glanced coolly at his watch. "If no one confirms Ms. Lawson's identity in the next 5 minutes, I will fax this entire file to the State Department of Justice, along with a formal request to open an investigation into unlawful arrest." A ripple of tension spread through the station. A logistics officer pulled out his phone to call a supervisor. A young officer, his face still boyish, his demeanor unseasoned, was ordered to check Bella's license plate. He entered the code, and seconds later, the screen displayed a line of text that immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Bella Lawson, Southbridge State Attorney, registered owner. Elias stood in silence, eyes on the officer. He didn't need to say a word. The evidence had spoken for itself. Corbin, who until now had maintained a cold front, suddenly began to justify. "She didn't have an ID. I followed the procedure. I acted by protocol." Elias turned, his gaze sharp as a blade. "No. You acted on prejudice. You didn't follow the Constitution. Procedure doesn't include ignoring verification, failing to ask a name, and handcuffing a citizen in broad daylight without probable cause." That statement rang out in the precinct, like a hammer striking the marble floor of false justice. Other officers began to whisper. One checked the body cam footage, only to discover Corbin's body cam had never been activated, violating Article 14.3 of the Operational Code passed earlier this year. And then, just as the tension reached an unbearable peak and no one dared to speak, a gravelly voice echoed from the hallway. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned. A tall figure entered, wearing a light gray shirt and holding a duty roster clipboard. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his eyes, though tired, held the steady authority of a man well-versed in crisis. It was Finn Cruz, the Southbridge precinct chief, known for reforming police protocol after the Williams case in 2019, and a man who had no patience for legal loophole games. Elias stood upright. Bella, now uncuffed, though her wrists were still swollen, locked eyes with him without blinking. "She is Bella Lawson," Elias said slowly, "and these people just arrested your state attorney without having the slightest idea who she was." Behind the glass panel, Corbin stood frozen. Sweat trickled steadily down his collar. But what awaited him wouldn't just be shame. It would be the first price he paid for putting bias before the law. The air inside Central Precinct dropped like someone had slashed through a song mid-verse with a blunt knife. When Finn Cruz, the Southbridge District Police Chief, entered, every gaze shifted immediately. He needed no introduction, no raised voice. At 61, after over 3 decades of service and overseeing 45 internal investigations, Finn was the kind of man whose mere presence made excuses shrink. He stepped forward, eyes slowly scanning each face. Bella Elias, then Corbin. He said nothing at first, offering only a subtle nod as if weighing the gravity of the moment with the kind of intuition that comes only from a lifetime on the force. Bella Lawson looked up, her gaze steady on the powerful man before her. Her voice rang out, not loud, not angry, but sharp enough to cut through the paper-thin veil of procedure. I told him my name. He didn't listen. I told him my title. He mocked it. Finn turned to Corbin, who had now taken a step back, spine stiff as if trying to salvage what was left of his dwindling authority. "Did you check the plate?" Finn asked, his voice low but laced with warning. "Did you run her through the system? Did you ask her name?" Corbin pressed his lips together, then shook his head. She didn't have ID. Finn didn't reply immediately. He turned toward Elias, who had already opened his leather case and produced a stack of crisp, laser-printed documents, vehicle registration, state employment records, and an official email address ending in @attorney.southbridge.gov with the name printed. Bella N. Lawson, Senior State Prosecutor. "This is the information your system could have pulled in 43 seconds, Elias said, without courtesy. "If you wanted to." Finn exhaled, the kind of sigh that comes from someone who has seen too many times when power was misused and justice twisted into a blunt instrument. "We've just detained a state official," he said, his eyes still fixed on the papers in Elias's hand, "and didn't even confirm her identity." Bella asked for nothing. She didn't threaten. She didn't demand compensation. She simply turned to Finn, her voice softening as if speaking on behalf of thousands who would never be heard. "What about the ones without a voice?" That question wasn't aimed at any one person. It echoed through the room like the indictment of an entire system. Not against an individual, but against institutionalized indifference. Elias, seeming to understand what Bella carried in her heart, spoke plainly. "We're requesting immediate suspension of Officer Corbin, an independent internal investigation, and a public apology across all official platforms." Corbin shook his head and exhaled harshly, but said nothing. His face flushed crimson, like a man cornered, with nothing left to stand on, but a pride no longer tied to any righteousness. Finn Cruz turned and walked to the operations desk, picked up the phone, and dialed directly to the Southbridge Police Department's Office of Professional Standards. Without a word of defense, he stated clearly, "I'm requesting immediate temporary suspension of Lieutenant Corbin, effective within 24 hours. Commence investigation into violation of operational procedure under Article 9.2. Hanging up, he turned back to the room, his voice lower, but solid as stone. "Protocol will be followed. And if something was wrong, we would not conceal it." But Bella shook her head. Her eyes no longer held fury, only the cold resolve of someone who had seen to the heart of the matter. "I appreciate you doing the right thing," she said. "But understand this. This is not the end. This is only the beginning." Elias nodded beside her, no words needed, because everyone in that room knew, when a name is dismissed, the whole system must be made to look again. And this time, the system wouldn't be able to look away. When the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Southbridge, the first leaks of the news began rippling across social media like shock waves. A single tweet, short but weighted, read, "State attorney wrongfully arrested because of her skin color." Within just 18 hours, it had been shared over 2.7 million times, with tens of thousands of comments, most filled with outrage, disbelief, and sorrow. Bella didn't speak out immediately. She knew any words spoken too soon would be twisted, distorted by a public yet to understand the full story. But she also knew that staying silent would only serve a system already accustomed to burying the truth. Reporters from CNN, NBC, and the Washington Post began calling the state attorney's office non-stop, demanding confirmation. Some local outlets had already picked up the incident, but framed it merely as a dispute between a citizen and a police officer. The truth, however, remained locked behind those white-painted doors where Bella had sat for over 3 hours with wrists swollen from the cuffs. 3 days after the incident, Bella appeared live on CNN, not as a lawyer, not as a victim, but as a witness to a system that needed to be held accountable. "I was lucky," she said, eyes locked on the camera. "I have a position, I have a lawyer, I have a voice, but thousands of others do not." Within 48 hours of the broadcast, over 800 emails and messages poured into Elias and his team, from ordinary citizens who had been arrested for looking suspicious, handcuffed in front of their children, or pulled from their vehicles for being not polite enough. Elias knew this was no longer an isolated case. He and Bella launched Justice First, an independent legal initiative to provide free assistance to individuals arrested under suspected racial bias across the state. Within just 72 hours of launching, they had already received 113 formal complaints. Under mounting media and public pressure, Police Chief Finn Cruz held a press conference. Looking straight into the camera, he admitted, "There were serious errors in the verification and arrest procedure of citizen Bella Lawson." He announced that Corbin would be immediately suspended and that an independent internal investigation would begin. At that very moment, a CCTV clip went viral, captured by a security camera from an office building across from Parkwood Plaza's lot. The 4-minute, 12-second video showed Bella rummaging through her car in search of her wallet, never once displaying behavior that could resemble breaking in or theft as initially alleged. This time, the truth had images to testify. Finn didn't shy away. In the following press conference, he declared, "We will reform this system, but not with words alone." Requests flooded in for Bella, from civil rights organizations, media outlets, and even political groups offering her roles as a spokesperson for criminal justice reform. But Bella, true to who she had always been, drew a clear line between righteousness and representation. "I don't speak for anyone. I stand with them." She didn't choose podiums. She didn't seek the spotlight. Instead, she organized her first community meeting at Parkwoods Baptist Church, where the quietest voices were finally heard. 214 people attended, most of whom had never stepped foot in a courtroom, never signed a complaint, but carried stories that had long been buried in silence. Bella didn't stand on a stage. She sat among them, listening. Every story was a fragment of a reality that had been ignored for too long. And inside that church, not politics, not statutes, but empathy transformed into action. 3 days after Bella's story shook Southbridge and ignited a wave of outrage across media platforms, she and Elias stepped into a room with no cameras, no flashing press lights, but it was there, within those walls, that real decisions were made. It was the disciplinary hearing chamber of the police department, where the Ethics and Discipline Committee had convened a special session to address the case of Lieutenant Corbin. Seated around the oval table were 7 senior figures: a representative from Internal Affairs, an investigator from the Integrity Commission, a federal judicial inspector, a civilian representative from the Community Justice League, 2 district commanders, and Police Chief Finn Cruz, who presided over the session. Corbin sat at the far end of the table, his uniform rumpled, collar askew, hands clasped tightly, as though holding on to composure, though his eyes kept darting away from Bella's gaze. He was no longer the officer who had wielded authority at the parking lot, no longer the man who had sneered outside the holding cell. Now, he was simply an individual brought into the light by a system forced to reckon with its abuse. Bella spoke first, not with aggression, but with precision. Her words were sharp, deliberate incisions into the warped shell of so-called procedure. She cited 3 specific articles from the Southbridge State Civil Service Code. Article 5.4, all citizens have the right to identity verification before any restriction of liberty. Article 7.3, use of physical restraints without resisting behavior constitutes a violation of ethical standards. Article 12.2, refusing to listen, refusing to verify, or willfully ignoring information provided by a citizen constitutes abuse of authority. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word carried the weight of experience, repressed indignation, and the pain of thousands who had been dismissed and ignored. Elias followed, armed with the language of statistics. He presented the 2022 Civil Rights Report, which stated, within 12 months, 426 Black citizens in Southbridge were arrested without undergoing basic identity verification procedures. Of those, over 73% were women. No one in the room objected. Corbin shifted in his chair, then finally spoke, his tone devoid of the aggression he once wore like armor. I didn't know she was a lawyer. But Bella cut in immediately, not with anger, but with a cold, irrefutable truth. You didn't need to know who I was. You just needed to follow protocol. Silence fell over the room, a silence that needed no explanation, because everyone understood. That was the point. No one was asking for special treatment, just fairness in the application of the law. Finn Cruz, who had remained observant until then, slowly stood, opened the file before him, and read aloud the committee's official ruling. Based on the serious breaches of operational procedure, failure to verify identity, unjustified use of physical restraint, and discriminatory conduct, Lieutenant Corbin is hereby permanently terminated and barred from re-employment in any law enforcement agency within the state of Southbridge. There was no applause, but it was a victory made sacred by silence, as if justice had finally found its way through years of suffocating denial. The news spread like wildfire. CNN, MSNBC, and the Washington Post ran headlines that read clearly, Southbridge Police fire officer for unlawful arrest of state attorney. History rewritten by a single name, Bella Lawson. But Bella didn't celebrate. At the press conference held shortly after, in front of more than 20 news outlets, she spoke briefly. Firing one person doesn't erase a culture of bias, but it is the first step in forcing the system to confront itself. That sentence became the official quote on the National Lawyers Guild's Twitter account. Within 5 days of the hearing, the hashtag #IamBellaLawson was used over 11 million times, appearing in speeches, law school lectures, and across hundreds of protest signs raised in justice, marches across more than 30 states. And for the first time since the incident, Bella smiled, not because she had won, but because she knew that while the system may not fall easily, it had begun to tremble. Because she had stood up. 2 weeks after Corbin's dismissal, Southbridge, a city once quiet in the face of persistent injustice, now echoed with voices that had never been heard before. And leading them was a woman once treated like a criminal in broad daylight, Bella Lawson. At Southbridge University, in an auditorium meant to seat just 500, more than 800 people crowded in to attend a public forum hosted by Bella and Elias. There were no press cameras, no lofty podium, just a circle of real stories, painful experiences that had been pushed into silence for far too long. 3 Black women stood, trembling yet resolute. They recounted being arrested simply for looking suspicious, each time by the same officer, Lieutenant Corbin. One was arrested while waiting for an Uber in a Walmart parking lot, another for walking home after a night shift. None had ever received an apology, and none of their cases were recorded in any official report. The room fell silent when a 67-year-old man, wearing a faded dress shirt, held the microphone with shaking hands and shared that he had been detained for 7 hours simply for riding his bicycle into a white neighborhood to visit his granddaughter. I didn't have an Elias to call. No one even knew where I was being held. Bella couldn't hold back her tears. She stepped down and took the man's hand. No words were needed. That single gesture became a viral image across social media in less than 2 hours, captioned, "One hand holding an entire forgotten community." That same day, Elias officially launched the Verify Before Restrain campaign, a legal initiative calling for every arrest in the state to require documentation of initial information, including the name of the arrestee, vehicle license plate involved, ID documents checked, name of the arresting officer, witnesses present, and audio or video evidence, if available. In just 24 hours, over 110,000 signatures were collected. The campaign became a movement, and Bella, the woman once handcuffed in 97-degree heat, was now appointed honorary chair of the Council for Equitable Justice, an alliance of 37 civil groups, attorneys, and human rights organizations from 12 different states, with a mission to monitor civil rights violations in law enforcement. In the state legislature, the Lawson bill was formally introduced by a white senator named Angela Forney. The bill mandates that all officers must verify identity via the internal electronic system before applying any physical restraint. If verification tools are not available at the scene, the arrest will be deemed a procedural violation. Police departments must submit a detailed report within 24 hours of any such incident. Police Chief Finn Cruz, once part of the old system, now declared, "We will reform from the roots. All recruits will undergo a training course. Unconscious bias and equal rights in law enforcement." The 36-hour program is taught by sociologists, lawyers, and survivors of misconduct. What no one expected: Corbin's ex-wife, Annalise, appeared on the evening news. Calm in expression but aching in her eyes, she said, "I'm not surprised by what he did. That arrogance is exactly why I divorced him." Her words cut like a fresh wound across an old truth. Cruelty doesn't always come in grand gestures. It often comes from the familiarity of disdain. And amid all the noise, Bella stayed steady in her rhythm. She didn't appear on flashy talk shows and didn't accept book deals. Instead, she visited high schools, community meetings, churches, places where the faintest voices still waited to be heard. During a live statewide television interview, the host asked, "Do you feel satisfied that the man who once demeaned you has now been punished?" Bella simply replied, "I'm not retaliating. I'm demanding justice, not just for me, but for the hundreds he's silenced over the years." A single sentence, plain, direct, but it left the studio in stillness. Because in it, there was no hatred, only the belief that justice, when reached through courage, would no longer be a dream reserved for the few. Not everyone who is wrongfully arrested gets the chance to turn their pain into policy. But Bella Lawson was not like anyone else. 3 weeks after the incident, Bella received an official letter from the Federal Judiciary Council inviting her to serve as a special advisor for a nationwide police reform program, the first of its kind to be implemented at the federal level after nearly 2 decades of stagnation. The letter contained one bolded sentence: "We need a voice grounded in reality, not just theory." On June 10th, in a Senate hearing room in Washington, D.C., Bella sat across from 5 senators, 2 federal cabinet members, and nearly 40 senior legal advisors. On the table were thick stacks of documents, evidence files, statistical reports, internal memos. But the room fell silent when she began to speak. Her 12-minute speech, delivered without notes and prior preparation, became one of the most widely shared videos on the C-SPAN platform that year. I'm not telling my story because I'm in pain. I'm telling it so that thousands of others don't have to stay silent. If a state prosecutor can be handcuffed for no reason, then who in this country can still believe that justice belongs to them? Beside her, Elias presented figures that quieted the room even further. 72% of wrongful arrests are never compensated or even acknowledged. 46% are not recorded in any internal system. Over the past 5 years, only 3 out of every 100 officers investigated for wrongful arrests were prosecuted. Midway through the hearing, an unexpected witness stood up. It was Officer Jacob Lorne, 27 years old, who had been present the day Bella was arrested. Fighting back emotion, he confessed before the entire nation, "I saw what happened. I didn't intervene, because I was afraid. I felt uneasy and powerless. But today, I can't stay silent anymore." The first applause broke out, then rippled through the entire chamber. Bella turned to Lorne and said into the microphone, "The truth rarely begins with the system. It begins with one person brave enough to say, 'I will no longer be complicit.'" That very day, a major documentary studio reached out to Bella, offering to reconstruct her case as part of its series Forgotten Files, which investigates civil rights violations that have never seen the light of day. Bella didn't agree immediately, but she made one condition. "You have to include more cases. I don't want it to be just about me." Elias, with his signature persistence, proposed the creation of the Victim Data Room, an independent, encrypted, and publicly accessible archive where records of questionable arrests could be submitted, stored, and accessed by attorneys, investigative journalists, and community representatives. In the first 3 months alone, over 2,000 cases from 18 states were submitted. At least 310 of them had previously been denied reopening by local police departments. In Southbridge, where it all began, Police Chief Finn Cruz, now under internal review for systemic oversight failures, extended an invitation for Bella to return, but not to speak or attend a seminar. He asked her to take part in rewriting the entire behavioral training curriculum for police officers, a program that hadn't been updated in 11 years. Bella thought for 2 days, then sent back a single-line response. "I will participate, but on one condition. The people must be present in the drafting room, not just officers, not just administrators. Every line of that curriculum must bear the fingerprints of those who've been suffocated by abusive power." The proposal, unusual, bold, was approved. Because now, the system could no longer pretend nothing had happened. And Bella, who once stood alone in a parking lot with her hands cuffed while a man saw only her skin color, had now been invited inside that very system. Not as a victim, but as someone rewriting the rules. No one could have predicted that a moment of injustice in a parking lot under the midday sun would make an entire nation listen. But Bella Lawson had never set out to become famous. Her goal had always been clear, not to be recognized, but to ensure others would never again be disregarded. Time magazine released its December issue with a portrait of Bella standing in front of Parkwood City Hall, eyes unwavering, the American flag fluttering in the background. The bold headline read, "Bella Lawson, the woman who made the system listen." That same week, Southbridge Law School, where Bella had once earned her master's degree, held a special ceremony to rename its Civil Rights Legal Center as the Bella L. Center for Civil Rights. Etched in stone was a quote from her first speech in Washington. "Power should not be given to those who've never known the fear of having none." A public survey published by the Southbridge Institute of Sociology surprised many. 86% of respondents believed the police needed deep reform, compared to just 51% the previous year. A striking shift that analysts began calling the Bella effect. Meanwhile, Elias Edwards, now seen as Bella's strategic partner in reform, was invited by Parkwood City Hall to rewrite the city's emergency civilian intervention policy, aimed at minimizing unnecessary use of force against unarmed civilians. One small but meaningful moment happened on a Friday afternoon when Bella attended a local church seminar. A middle-aged woman in a civil service uniform quietly approached her and said, "I used to work under Corbin. Back then, I saw how he treated people like you, and I said nothing. Today, I want to apologize, not just for myself, but for all those who stayed silent." Bella didn't say much. She gently placed her hand on the woman's shoulder and nodded. To her, an apology couldn't change the past, but it could begin to cleanse the present. Elsewhere, Corbin, the former officer who arrested Bella, was now living in seclusion in a small town near the state border. After being rejected for re-employment by 3 different agencies, he submitted a petition to the Southbridge Civil Council protesting his termination. But after a thorough review of records, video footage, and testimonies, his appeal was fully denied, with a final note stating, "Lacks awareness of consequences, unfit for reinstatement of professional honor." Bella didn't care about Corbin's fate. She wasn't seeking retribution against him. She wanted the system to change so no one else would be treated like a criminal just for the color of their skin. On a cold November morning, Bella visited the family of Devin Carter, a 21-year-old black man who had been wrongfully arrested due to a matching description, and later took his own life in holding the previous year. A photo of Devin hugging his mother stood beside his white gravestone. Bella didn't bring red roses. She laid a single white chrysanthemum and whispered, "I'm alive, so I must speak for those who no longer have the chance." That very evening, the fundraising campaign for the Bella L. Legal Fund, a non-profit offering free legal aid to victims of discriminatory law enforcement, was launched. In the first 10 days, donations reached $4.2 million, contributed by more than 162,000 people nationwide. Not from big corporations, but from ordinary people, each giving a few dollars, a few hundred, to create a wave of justice. Bella declined all political nominations. In a press conference in Parkwood, she said, "I don't need a seat to prove what's right or wrong. I just need to keep the door behind me open, so those who were once pushed down can walk forward with me." And with every step she took, Bella never sought the spotlight. She wanted only one thing: respect, not for her title, not for her fame, but for the dignity that every human being deserves. 1 year after being handcuffed under the scorching sun in Parkwood, Bella Lawson stood on the stone steps of the Southbridge State Capitol. Under a cloudless sky, the flag rose slowly, and below it was a long line of people: civil servants, lawyers, activists, students, and citizens from many cities who had come together. Over 1,200 people were present, and millions more were watching live on 3 national television channels. There were no flower stands, no ceremonial music, only a microphone and a single empty chair behind her with a sign that read, "For those who never had the chance to tell their story." Bella wore a simple navy blue blazer, no badges, no honors. She held no printed speech. She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the crowd, and began to speak, drawing from the very memory that had changed her life forever. "I was once asked, 'Who are you to stand here?' I was once handcuffed while trying to find my wallet. I was once laughed at for saying I was a state attorney. So today, I'm not reading a prepared speech. I'm telling this, so none of us forget the day the law failed to recognize the very people who shaped it. Some shed tears. Some reached out to the hands of those beside them. And in the front row, Elias Edwards, the companion who never left her side throughout the journey, lifted his head, his eyes red but filled with pride. He didn't need to say anything, because he knew that without that day, this one would not have existed. To the right of the stage stood Finn Cruz, now director of the statewide administrative reform program. When Bella mentioned his name, the entire hall fell silent. I know you hesitated, you doubted, but you didn't turn away from the truth, and for that I thank you. Finn bowed his head, unable to hide his emotion. Behind Bella stood the official announcement board of the Southbridge Police Conduct Reform Act, with 14 newly ratified provisions, including mandatory identity verification before any act of restraint, absolute prohibition on detaining citizens with no recorded charges, and a requirement that all new officers complete 60 hours of mandatory training in systemic, bias, and civil rights. Bella did not celebrate a victory, because to her, this was not a personal triumph. This was a beginning. After the ceremony, as she stepped down the stone steps, a young black girl, around 8 years old, hair neatly braided, eyes wide and bright, ran up and hugged her tightly. "Miss Bella, I want to be a lawyer like you someday." Bella paused. Then she knelt, placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, smiled, and replied, not into the microphone, but quietly, though dozens of cameras caught the moment. "And you'll never be asked, 'Who are you to dare?' again, because you won't need to prove it. You are worthy." Applause rose like waves from the front row to the farthest edge of the square. Not applause for a victim, but for a guide. In the golden autumn light of late afternoon, Bella Lawson walked slowly, steadily through a crowd that parted like a path opening to something greater than her, alone. A symbol, a reckoning, a reminder that sometimes one person brave enough to stand is enough to make an entire system kneel before the truth. Tomorrow, there will still be obstacles, prejudices, and misconduct. But thanks to her, silence will no longer be a shield for injustice. And when someone asks, "Who are you to dare?" the answer will be, "I'm a citizen." And that's enough. Something has begun to change. Join us in sharing meaningful stories. Hit like, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications to start your day with powerful lessons and genuine empathy.